most humans respond best to a seemingly random dollar amount. So if you're going to go sell a vehicle, you price your vehicle at $16,000, you're less likely to have somebody pay that price and more likely to have somebody negotiate you down versus if you priced it at $16,183, for example, right?
Welcome to the FlyWheel Effect, the podcast where ambition meets expertise in the world of luxury home services. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a small business owner, or a forward-thinking professional, this is your platform for growth, profit, and prosperity. Each episode, we dive deep into how to leverage data for smarter business decisions and share insights that help you transition from technician to visionary. Let's jump in.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the FlyWheel Effect. I'm Brent Sonnek-Schmelz with my co-host and business partner, Matt Bernath. Matt, how was your weekend this past weekend?
Oh, man, it was awesome. Pretty funny little situation, though. I was on a mountain bike trail, one that I hit frequently. It's right behind my house. And I just went out on my own because I needed to hit the trails pretty quickly. Didn't have time to meet up with the group and whatnot. And going down this really fast trail, and I was hauling butt and ended up catching this small group of guys down there and decided to just thread my way through them, right? Like I'm going so much faster than them. And I end up right behind this guy in a turn, taking a different line than I normally take. And I grabbed the brakes and I grabbed too much front brake and just went right over the bars. And I haven't crashed in 3 years. But the most embarrassing part is I'm that guy who went and passed all the slower guys and ended up just crashing right in front of them. And of course, one by one, they all go right by me. So that was my Saturday. And thankfully, a little bit of a shoulder injury, but nothing I can't recover from. But yeah, man, I felt like such a douchebag.
You get the stink eye from everyone going by?
No, I mean, they're like, oh, you okay, man? But of course, at the bottom of the hill, they're just laughing. Oh, that guy passed us and crashed. So
yeah,
cool thing was I got to test out my safety gear because it was 3 years ago that I crashed and I bought a bunch of safety gear after my crash and I haven't been down since. So safety gear did its job, a couple of bruises, otherwise I'm good.
So like elbow pads, knee pads. I'm not a big mountain biker. So elbow pads, knee pads. I know you probably had a helmet before, but like more than that?
Yeah, I got a full face helmet now. So I used to have just a regular one. So I got a full face downhill helmet, elbow pads, knee pads, really like almost zero road rash. I got my ankle got banged up, but yeah, other than that, just a little bit of muscle soreness. And I mean, I went full flying W off the front of the bars and thankfully didn't end up in too much pain. So it was more my ego bruised than anything.
Well, I had a great trip to BJ's and bought my twins a bubble gun that they really enjoyed. So that bubble gun was all the excitement that I could handle.
What's BJ's? Is that like a market?
Yeah, it's like a Costco, right? Like it's just BJ. Oh, it's a price club type of thing. Yeah, it just happens. There's both, and I just went to the BJ's this time. But they had a bubble gun, and the kids were really happy because they're going to BJ's. They know they're getting a toy. So got them the bubble gun. They came home, emptied it immediately, got the bubbles rolling, and that was the end of the afternoon. So the life of a toddler dad is not much more than bubble guns and changing diapers, right?
Yeah.
So luckily my girl is spot on. She's sleeping, doing the whole thing, potty trained. The boy, different story, does not like pooping in the toilet. So
yeah, they move at a different pace. So anyway, so now we get weekends out of the way. Let's just jump into our topic for the week. We're going to cover this time the psychology of pricing. And I think that the way we're phrasing that psychology of pricing is actually really important. Pricing is much more than, in my mind, much more than a simple exercise of slapping a sticker on something. It is how does it affect the buyer? How does it affect the seller? What's the indication of what's going on with the pricing itself and the product? And this one is you can never be a perfect pricer. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what we come out of this episode. Matt, what is it about pricing that interests you as a business owner? Yeah, this is an interesting topic. I think when I think of pricing, I think of three things, or when I think of the psychology or pricing strategy. And I guess the psychology is actually different than pricing strategy. So if we have time, we should also just touch on pricing strategy as it relates to gross margins and things. But
if we're just talking about the psychology of pricing, I think there's three things that come up for me. One is the actual price numerically, right? So how do you think about the dollars and cents of the price?
That's you mean the actual digits?
The actual digits, right? The actual digits. And so there's a number of things that come up for me around the actual digits. The other piece is packaging. So what is included at different price points? That'd be, I guess, number two. And then number three is the options relative to each other. So one of the, I think, most common analogies is when you go to the movie theater, for anybody who still does that, you go to the movie theater and getting the medium and large popcorn is just a no-brainer, right? They clearly price them in such a way that you're never buying. Very few people buy the small. They end up buying the medium or the large. And oftentimes it's the large because it's 50 cents more than the medium, and the medium's $2.50 more than the small, right? So I think those are the three things, right? The digits, the packaging of what's included at the different price points, and then also the price points relative to each other. So those are the three things.
And just to clarify, you're not talking packaging like physical box or bag. You're talking the suite or bundle of included attributes or products that are included in the price. And when I think that's a classic call, 1-800 number call from TV where it's, and get the spatula for free. Right. It's $17.99 value. Costs them a nickel, but that's where you're going with packaging, right?
Yep.
Let's unpack all three. I know digits is something you care about a lot. Right? Like I down to the penny that I have in my interaction with you. You like sevens, I think, is what I remember correctly.
Yeah, I base a lot of my pricing, my psychological pricing strategy on a number of different studies that I've read. So one of the sort of most significant that has impacted my feeling of pricing is Charles Duhigg has a really incredible book called The Small Big. It's perfect for ADHD brains like mine because it has 40 different small experiments. So it's 40 books in one, and they're very small, pointed books. And the way that each one of these experiments is formulated is these scientists come up with a theory about, they're all business applications. They come up with a theory, and in this case, the one I'm referencing is a pricing theory of do people respond more to whole prices, say $500? Or do they respond better to prices like $5.99 or random pricing or potentially random pricing of $581? And he explains the whole study. But essentially, the outcome of this study, to make a long story short, is that most humans respond best to a seemingly random dollar amount. So if you're going to go sell a vehicle, you price your vehicle at $16,000. You're less likely to have somebody pay that price and more likely to have somebody negotiate you down versus if you priced it at $16,183, for example, right? And the study essentially shows that when you have a seemingly random number, it makes the buyer feel like the seller did a bunch of research, and that's the market price. That's what they should pay for that. So that's a very interesting one. And then the whole 97 thing is really just a take on a completely different lesson learned early on in that 99 is overused. 97 accomplishes the same thing as what 99 used to. So,
yeah, so unpacking that a little further, right? I think understanding what those digits mean at different price points up and down the price and value spectrum, because I think understanding value relative to price is an important part of psychology. And a dollar store prices everything at a whole number, $1, right? A true dollar store. It's not that many left, but a true dollar store is $1. And it's a whole number. It's not 97 cents. It's not $1.15, not $1.27. It's $1. And people recognize that $1 is cheap for the right product, provides great value, and it's easily accessible so that you can go through the store and know, hey, I've just picked up 27 items. I'm going to pay $27. So, but on the higher end, we're talking with something very different where it's not speed and expediency. It's representing value with digits in a completely different way. Right. And I think when we're talking about value here in pricing, we're talking obviously the higher end. However, within a bid, there's going to be low dollar value products. Do you want to price them at $1, $10, or do you want to price those lower value products that are part of the bid at something other than?
right? Like I think because this kind of leads into that next phase of packaging or that bundle of when you're pricing something and understanding what's going on, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think if I'm hearing you, I think what you're saying is that depending on what's included in the proposal, you might benefit, or a seller might benefit from using a combination of strategies.
Exactly. And it becomes a more nuanced, complex proposal. And you could be like Ticketmaster and hold back all the fees that everyone thinks you're paying $100 and it's actually $137, but that's a whole nother pricing matter.
Yeah. So tell me more about how you see that working, and we'll just reference luxury home services because that's most of our listeners. How do you see the different pricing strategies working out in a proposal to their seller's advantage?
Well, I think if you're dealing with a luxury home service, the customer, understanding the customer and the psychology of pricing is really important. For the most part, you're dealing with an affluent customer base. We're not dealing with someone who's buying a chain link fence for their backyard and has to get financing at 25% to pay the $2,500. That's not what we're talking about for the most part. That person has a different pricing elasticity. For a luxury for a person who's looking to buy the type of luxury home services we're talking about, assumption is basically they can afford it or come close to it without putting themselves in a deep hole. However, that doesn't mean that they will accept any price. And because they tend to view themselves as intelligent for the most part, whether or not they are, it's a different story, but they view themselves as being capable people. When they go through something, they don't want to feel they're getting nickel and dimed or taken advantage of. But you're going to have a number of items on that bid, right? How you break that down and how you identify those items, I think is actually really important to providing someone with trust that you are providing them with a good or value-based pricing of some sort. The value is the real question. And two, that you're competent in the way that you're going about setting up that project. And by triggering competency, I'm moving off topic a little bit, but doing that is, hey, for things that are cheap or lower price that are on the bid, sometimes it's better to price them very directly and bundle them in a group than be cute about what dollars and cents they are. If I see something that's $1.37 on a bid that I'm spending $100,000 on, I'm like, what the hell is this $1.37 thing? Maybe you say there's going to be, you can either group them and give it a number, or make it $1, make it $2. I don't actually want to see in the smaller dollar value in that case something that's really an oddball number, right? So it's a blended thing. To get to your point, rambling a little bit because I think about this actually more than you realize. So if by looking at each item on that bid, how it relates to signaling as far as its value, making sure that your customer doesn't feel taken advantage of, and that you're trustworthy and competent, are all part of that psychology of pricing, is really what I was getting into. I would love to hear your feedback on that. I touched on a variety of different things in that long little soliloquy.
Yeah. No, I understand, and I agree with your perspective. I think my experience with the psychology of pricing, especially in the luxury side, is the simpler you can make the decision for the buyer, the better. By and large, the luxury home services buyer is a busy person. They're making a lot of decisions in their life, and the easier you can make this decision, the better. So I totally identify with your concept of, hey, let's not have a bunch of little prices here because it's something for me to think about. Yeah, the brain is really good at shortcutting decisions. And so if we can make that easier for them, better off we are. I take the perspective, and this is from actual evidence, that not providing line item pricing on most bids is actually better off. So really, the only line item pricing that should be available for most luxury home service bids is options. You should price out your options and price those as bundles as well. And primarily because what ends up happening, one of the main reasons we see luxury providers move from a packaged price to a line item price is because the buyer is trying to build a case in their mind for why you are more expensive. So, for example, luxury buyer gets 3 bids. Your bid is the highest. Therefore, luxury buyer goes out and asks you, hey, why is your bid more expensive? You don't provide line item pricing, so I can't compare. And then, of course, we get into the conversation of trying to explain what's included in this and that. And you go from it being a emotional sale, which is where it should stay, to a logical sale, which is it's really hard to sell logically. So in my experience, it's actually better to package price. Hey, your luxury pool or your luxury home theater or whatever it is that you're selling, this is how much this thing costs. Much if you go buy a vehicle, you can't say, hey, I like this BMW. I just don't know why it's expensive. Oh, I see the leather is more expensive than the Volvo leather, whatever. So ultimately, long story short is I recommend, or I've had the most success with bundle pricing. And whenever somebody comes back and says, hey, how much is this component of your bundle? That's a signal from the buyer that they're interested in what you're selling. They just need to understand how you got to that price. Or more importantly, they need to understand why should it go with you versus the other guy? Because you're more expensive. And then pricing the options potentially, as you described, in whole numbers makes that an easier decision for them.
Yeah, I think that buyer question comes back to, I think, two big topics when it comes to the psychology of pricing is trust and competency. Right? Like that buyer wants to know, are you more competent than the other guy such that the value I'm going to receive justifies paying the higher price?
Yeah.
And do I trust that's accurate, or are you just, whitewashing me? Those, and having the right response to that question is make or break, right? You don't want to let that customer go. They're yours if you want it. Now the question is, how do you convince them that they're making the right choice in going with you? And it's all comes from that pricing and that conversation, but I think to your point, you can't give in and say, I'm just going to give you a breakdown of every little item that's involved, because then you start negotiating over little stuff that doesn't make any difference and you've lost. So when that question comes to you, how do you drive through to the close and demonstrate your value?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I generally would go back to qualifying, because to your point, the customer is probably not feeling the trust or competency that you would expect at that point in time. And I would generally go back to asking questions. So if a customer comes back and says, hey, you know what, this other guy broke down all the line items, you didn't break down your line items, and by the way, you're more expensive, so it's hard for me to compare apples to apples. You say, okay, well, tell me about the basis that you're making your decision, right? What are the most important considerations that you're basing your decision on? And usually one of my favorite qualifying questions, and of course this is related primarily to home technology, but it can be applied to any home service, is rank these three in order of importance: price, performance, and aesthetics. And when the customer would rank those three things, it would help me to truly understand what filter they're using for making their decision, right? If price was their primary filter, then they're probably not going to choose the most expensive person, right? Because performance and aesthetics rank lower than price. But if it was performance and or aesthetics that ranked higher than price, generally I knew at that point it was worth going into it with the buyer, right? And I think that form of that question could be applied across many different service providers. But ultimately what it comes down to is helping the buyer to understand that they're buying a finished product, not a bunch of parts and pieces. Because again, you go to build a house, you don't generally know what nails cost and 2x4s cost and the roofing costs. It's just, this is what the house costs built. So generally I like to go back to qualifying. If I qualify them to be a customer, then I will go into the detail of, hey, Mr. Customer, it looks like there's a good fit between what we sell and what you're looking to buy. This is what this whole solution costs, right? And it's a solution. It can't be broken down.
Yeah, and I mean, some people go with that, some will not. And that also it changes depending on the macro environment, right? If this is a hot market where you can sell and you're overloaded, you hold tight to everything. If all of a sudden things are south, it's another conversation where you're worried about getting that job because your pipeline isn't full. How does what you just said change depending on those two environments? And I believe we're moving from one to the other right now.
I'll tell you my perspective on it doesn't change at all. I think what does change is the skill of the salesperson needs to change. So salesperson needs to qualify better upfront to understand what solution they're designing, right? And this applies for nearly all home services. There's always a good, better, best solution available to just about anything, right? Pool, spas, windows, window treatments. Doesn't matter what you're selling, there's good, better, best. And the challenge with luxury home services versus, let's say, cars, a buyer can go online, they can go to Volvo, BMW, Toyota, whatever, and they can figure out what the car of their dreams costs. And the car of their dreams might be a Honda Civic LX base model. The car of their dreams might be a 7 Series BMW with all the fixings. They can go out and figure out what that costs. Luxury home services, they can't do that. There's a few solutions out there. HTA in the home technology world gives you some idea of what these things cost. But for the most part, in order to get a market price on a backyard remodel, they have to go get bids. And they're generally not in a position to really understand what they're buying until they go out and get these different bids. So qualifying becomes really important to understand, hey, what bids have you received? What seems to be make or break for you? What are the most important factors that you want to be included in here? But I don't think that changes. In fact, I know it doesn't change my perspective on package pricing versus line items, because when you throw the line items out there, it just serves to confuse the buyer more than it does to help them, regardless of the cycle.
Right. No, and that kind of gets me to one of the things that I learned in my education is I look at pricing also as part of a graph, right? X-axis is price. The intersection is high price. Distance is low price. Y-axis, differentiation. Low differentiation is down by the intersection. High differentiation is to go up. You want to get as far out to the horizon, to the end curve as you can, meaning if you can be highly differentiated and high price, but you're truly differentiated, you offer huge value. The other way to differentiate is to not have a lot of differentiation, but have very low price, that you're going to be on price and you're going to beat everybody on price every day. Both are accurate. Then there's somewhere in the middle. I think for most luxury home service providers, figuring out that differentiation where price moves out of the concern and you are just demonstrating huge amount of value is where most of people who are providing services to luxury homes needs to be. That's really hard because maybe that's not how they look at things in their own life, right? Because price is much more of a concern unless you're like the $20 million number one guy, landscape guy in the Hamptons, right? That's a different model. But for generally, you have to start changing your mentality to think of differentiation instead of price to truly be successful in this market. Your margins go up, your sales go up, customers are happier. You are the person that is going to be the choice, the A choice every single time. That's the differentiation goal, right?
Yeah, I agree. There is very little reward. In fact, there's no reward for being the second cheapest guy in the marketplace, right?
Right.
You're either the low price leader and you're optimized for that, or you're commanding the premium and you're optimized for that, or you're somewhere in the middle getting beat up every day. And I think that's the challenge that a lot of luxury home service providers experience, is that they have this belief that there's some market price for what they do. And frankly, there isn't. That market price depends on each individual relationship and buyer that you're talking to. And if that buyer perceives you to be the most competent and highest value player in the market, chances are you can command a premium. Otherwise, you're competing based on price. And if you're not the low price guy, you're just getting beat up all the time, regardless of the business cycle.
And sometimes you're the low price guy by accident or something. I have another business, a real estate business. We do small fix and flips and some smaller scale rentals. And my business partner in that is a contractor. Fantastic contractor. Like, this guy knows every trade backwards and forwards, can do everything under the sun and do it well and do it fast. And he's always talking about how busy he is with everything. And I'm like, dude, you just got to raise your prices. And he's like, oh no, then I won't get the jobs. And I'm like, so what? Don't get the jobs, raise your prices until such time that you make more money and you're still going to be busy because everybody wants this, raise your prices 30-40%, because your quality is good. People will pay it when they know that you can deliver, and they know he can deliver, and he costs himself money every day by failing to price properly, because his psychology is it has to be a deal. That's a problem.
Yeah, I totally agree. We see that regularly in the work that we do with Vital. In fact, that's probably one of our biggest hurdles that we work with on custom integrators on. There's this massive fear, and it's an unfounded fear. If you price yourself properly, well, the first requirement is you have to be delivering great work. If you're a subpar provider, you will always be struggling with pricing strategy. But if you're one at the top in the marketplace, which can be done, you should be premium priced.
Yeah, I never, especially during the COVID bump, why anybody would worry about price, right? But everybody was. I mean, all kinds of people I've talked to, like, oh, I'll lose the jobs, or they're not going to like me. I don't know what it is. Raise those prices and understand that you can. I think the more common situation is not that people lose too much business, is that they're pleasantly surprised that people accept their bids as is.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really important point about the potential for business cycle change. And when I zoom out, the business cycle is what the business cycle is. Having some method of forecasting what's going to happen in the future allows us to maximize our outcomes during the good times, because chances are we might have to suffer through stricter margins during an upside down business cycle. But if you've maximized your margins during the great times, then you can sort of sail through. And I equate it to playing craps. With craps, the table gets hot and you can go on a run. For anybody that's played craps, we've all been on those runs, right? Where just the table is just going nuts and everybody's making a bunch of money. And you have to maximize those runs in order to have a big enough stack to make it through when the table goes cold. Or you just walk away, of course, when the table goes cold. But sometimes you don't know that until the table's cold for a while. And I think the business cycle is similar. Of course, gambling is gambling. It's not business. But business cycle is similar in that you brought up the COVID bump, or anytime that we see this really strong business cycle, those are the times to just maximize and put money away, because you're going to have to deal with potentially some challenging pricing strategy when the cycle changes. Just a reality, I think.
What's your favorite bet on the craps table?
I play a strategy called the squeeze play, where I'm always on the pass line and I always bet odds on the pass line. But when there's a point, I usually start on the inside, high on 6 and 8. So I've got 5, 6, 8, and 9. And then once I'm paid 2 or 3 times on the inside, then I'll add 4 and 10 low. And then once I'm paid on that for a while, then I'll actually bring things down. Or if the table's hot, I'll continue to press those come bets.
That's great. I love the come bet, and I always put odds on the come bet too. But by far, I don't know. I love the hard ways. I love hard 8, hard 6, hard 10. Interesting. I only bet them when a point is on the table of that number, like 6, 8, 10. I'm gonna bet if I see one of those, I'm doing the hard way and I'm dropping a nickel or whatever. It's not a huge bet on that. Right. And then when it hits, that's like the best thing ever. So it actually relates to pricing, because the psychological impact of that causes me to continue to do so, even though I know it's a terrible bet, because the feeling of when it works is so good. And when pricing, and it's like, and this drives it back, what's the value? And it's all about perceived value, right? Relative value is perceived value as much as anything, like on the craps table. By the way, next time we're in Vegas, which I know we both go fairly often, let's go play some craps. So let's flip into 3, because I'm going to cut B. We're moving on. This has been a great conversation. What do you mean by relative value?
Relative value. Third. Yeah. So my third piece was relative value in the sense of how things are priced. And this doesn't always relate to home services directly, unless you're giving them multiple options. And so relative value, meaning, if you have a good, better, best solution, finding the solution that provides the most gross margin for the company and pricing that in such a way that the buyer is more likely to make that choice. So oftentimes that's the middle pricing tier, right? The middle pricing tier at the movies or the theater or just about anywhere, is usually the one that most buyers go to because that's just the psychology of pricing. They're going to go with the middle of the road program. But also that's usually the option that makes the most gross margin for the seller. And pricing in such a way where it makes sense for the buyer to go with that solution is the better bet for the seller.
Good. Interesting. I think this kind of gets into a little bit more of that pricing strategy that I think maybe will be another podcast. Because sometimes your best strategy is to price yourself significantly above everybody else, right? And it leads into that relative value. Man, you're so expensive, you must be great. And I think I'd like to talk about that maybe on our next time we get together. Matt, this has been great. Anything else you'd like to add here?
No, I think it's been fantastic. Thanks for sharing the good questions and your feedback and experiences as well.
All right. And for all the listeners out there, if you'd enjoyed this podcast, if you found value in it, we do not take any advertising. What you can do is pay the fee, which is give us a review and share it with someone who you think will like it as well. For all you home service artists out there, this is Brent Sonnek-Schmelz and Matt Bernath from the FlyWheel Effect, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, man. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you for tuning in to the FlyWheel Effect. Our journey through the intricate world of luxury home services continues to be fueled by your passion for excellence and innovation. If you found value in our conversations today, don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. More insights and resources. Visit us online at growwithvital.com. Until next time.